So before we begin the presentation, so to gain the most of today's presentation, we ask that participants, So what do you need to know before we begin? This webinar is designed to deepen your understanding of the SIR and the baseline updates and to help you effectively apply these concepts to your healthcare facility. We do ask that participants have some prerequisite knowledge in that you have a working understanding of the SIR, including its purpose and calculation, familiarity with the concept of a baseline in healthcare surveillance data, and basic knowledge of NHSN's rebaseline process and how it impacts the interpretation of the SIR data. We do, on this slide, there are additional links that will help fill in those gaps in case there are any for you at this time. We have a few disclaimers and disclosures related to the CMS published notice for the use of the new 2022 baseline models. I will leave this on the slide for a bit. And if there are any questions about the CMS programs, please submit your questions to the links or the direct email addresses that are listed on this slide for each of the CMS programs. One more slide of disclaimers. This presentation does not include patient health or identifiable information, images of fictitious data and facility information or for illustrative purposes only, and do not represent actual NHSN data. Currently available for the 2020 baseline SIRs within the NHSN application is we have the 4 acute care hospitals and critical access hospitals, CLABSI, CAUTI, and CDI models are available. And for MRSA, bacteremia, and SSI, colo, and SSI HIST, all facility types are currently available within the analysis reports. However, today's presentation will only cover CDI LabID event, and that you will be able to find separate webinar trainings for the released 2022 baseline SIRs available within the application. To review the rebaseline tracker, we have a website where you're able to access to learn which additional 2022 baseline SIR and SUR reports have been added to the application and to be able to track it over time in the future. The objectives for today's presentation is that we hope that you all will be able to identify, locate, and use components, use the key components and resources for the CDI LabID SIR baseline, including an understanding of the risk factors, calculation of the number of predicted events, viewing the 2022 baseline SIR and data quality analysis reports, as well as providing links, as well as being aware of the 2022 baseline materials. Also, we hope to explain the importance of risk adjustment factors and where these data are reported within NHSN. And the last objective is to analyze the new CDI LabID SIR reports and evaluate the impact of different risk adjustment factors on the CDI LabID SIR. So our plan for today is that Kevin will present the new risk adjustment models for CDI LabID, discuss the statistical models for developing the statistical methods for developing the new model, and will provide an example of how to manually calculate the SIR denominator. Then I will join again to provide details about the new CDI LabID SIR reports, information about each of the risk factors used in the model, and provide guidance on how to review these risk factors. And lastly, we will end with a Q&A if there are additional time. As there are questions during this presentation, please submit them via the Q&A section of Teams. And I will turn it over to Kevin.
Great, thanks. Thanks a lot, Karen. So I am going to be providing some detail about the new CDI SIR 2022 rebaseline models. But before we do, we're going to backtrack a little bit and cover some key information first. So if you want to advance the slide. So first, let's talk about the standardized infection ratio, or the SIR. Great acronym, right? It is the ultimate measure that we're going to be producing. It's a simple ratio, simple division of a hospital's observed HAIs divided by their number of predicted HAIs. Now that top part, that numerator, is something that gets reported to NHSN. And as a statistics team, all we have to do is count those and add them up. The bottom part, the denominator, is a little more entertaining for us. This is something we calculate, and this is what the new rebaseline models are going to inform, this number of predicted HAIs. But the nice thing is once you have both of these, the calculation of the SIR is very, very simple. It's an easy division. So there's an example here where a hospital has 5 CDI events in the numerator. That's their observed count. And in the denominator, Becky's making us do some calculator work here. So 3.221 predicted lab CDI events. Plug this into a calculator and you will get an SIR of 1.552. Once you have this ratio, you really just compare it against the number 1. So if your value of the SIR is above 1, that means your hospital has more observed events than predicted. If it's less than 1, it means you have less observed events than predicted. We also provide information on p-values and 95% confidence intervals that will inform statistical significance. And on this slide are great resources down below, the statistics calculator. And a very helpful one is that guide to the 2022 rebaseline SIR. We'll probably reference that one quite a bit as we go. Next slide. So who uses the SIR data? So the SIR data is used by several stakeholders: CMS, state health departments, corporations, nonprofit research groups. But here at the CDC, we use it to track progress on reducing HAIs at the national and state level. And finally, your facility can use SIR data to track progress over time. And you can see on the right-hand slide are various websites and publications where the SIR data is reported. Next slide. There we go. I'm going to take a brief pause here, answer some preemptive questions. The first one has to deal with the 2022 SIR baseline CMS quality reporting programs, and this is what we know as of today. So the type of risk adjustment models that were used for the CDI lab in 2022 baseline remains the same as CMS has historically used for quality reporting programs. Currently, CMS uses the former 2015 baseline models for their inpatient prospective payment system. And recently, CMS announced that the adoption of the new 2022 rebaseline models will be in the fall of 2026. However, these new 2022 rebaseline models are now available in the NHSN application for facility and group users. and you can use these for your internal analysis. There is a great link down below for which baseline report should I use, a great fact sheet to review. Next slide, please. Sorry, thank you. I can't tell if these are moving slow on just my end or everyone else's, so I apologize for the pause. So now let's get into the methods for obtaining the SIR formula. And really, if you remember the SIR formula, it's really that bottom part of the ratio that we're here to inform, the number of predicted events. So how do we get this? So first, we are going to limit the data we're using for this modeling purpose to a single baseline year, which in this case was 2022. Prior, it was based off of 2015. Facility data reported to NHSN for 2022 was used in modeling as long as the data met inclusion criteria. Next, to predict the number of LabID events, we used a negative binomial regression model. Now, we're not going to go into the specifics of what this model, but it is a very common regression model for count or rate data, which is the kind of data we're dealing with right now, and is the same modeling strategy used in the former 2015 model. This risk adjustment model will use facility characteristics reported to NHSN that impact HAI incidents. If a characteristic was available but not found to be an important factor in predicting events, then that characteristic was not used in the final SIR model. Now, to start this modeling process, and believe me, it's a process we went through. We first evaluate all of these characteristics in isolation. We call this the univariate procedure to start. And what we do here is determine each variable's optimal parameterization for that specific characteristic. After we do that for each individual variable, then we start the modeling process, which is just a linear combination of this final optimal set of characteristics. Now, at the very end, all of this dust settles. We have a lot of variables in a model. We may do additional simplification after that to create the most parsimonious model we can. And finally, at the end, we have several model diagnostics that we run to just assure that the background assumptions are being met. Next slide, please. There are many resources that you can view. I'm giving more of the Cliff Note version of this, but these three guides will give a lot more detailed information. The NHSN Rebaseline webpage will give details both as a general for the SIRs and specifically for the CDI LabID SIR. The updated SIR guide for 2022 is the second link. This document provides a lot of great information. It goes to a more in-depth explanation of our approach and the data used and the models that were fitted. And then finally, you can check out the NHSN SIR Model Explorer. This is a little more simple way for users to view the parameter estimates of our models, including the one we're going to be talking about. Next slide, please. All right, now we get into the now we get into the fun stuff, the stuff we're here to see. So the CDI LabID is actually 4 separate models depending on facility type. So the largest is going to be the acute care model. There's also a critical access, a long-term care model, and an inpatient rehab facility. Now, because the acute care model is the biggest, it covers the most patient days. That's the one we're going to highlight in this talk, but all of those guides and references that we've talked about will give you information about the other three as well. The ACH model, the acute care model for CDI, ended up with 7 risk factors in the final model. So it was the inpatient community onset prevalence rate, the CDI test type, the combined ED OBS community onset prevalence rate, facility type based on NHSN enrollment, the number of ICU beds, the medical school affiliation type, and the average length of stay. Next slide. All right, this slide gives us the information that's going to inform that denominator in the SIR ratio, the number of predicted events. So it looks like it's 2 tables. This is really 1 table split into 2 for increasing of the font reasons. But this shows all 7 variables. So the first column is the risk factor we're looking at. The second column are the levels that variable takes on. And then importantly for the calculation is the third column, that's the parameter estimate. So there's some things I'm going to highlight here. So the first row, you'll see it says intercept and there's no levels. So in all of our calculations, when we deal with risk models, we always start with the intercept. It's in every calculation we use, and it's kind of the starting point value that we're working off of. If we drop to the next row below, the inpatient CO prevalence rate per 100 admissions, you will see that there's various levels that this takes on. It takes on 8 different levels. And so ranging from 0 all the way to greater than or equal to 0.461. If we move to the right of that, we show all of the parameter estimates that correspond to these levels. And there's some things I want to note. First, you will see the phrase referent given all across this table. So for any variable that's defined by categories, we have to have a reference category. Now, it's largely arbitrary what we call a reference category, but we kind of have a rule with the statistics team that whenever possible, we make the reference category the least risk group out of the different levels. So what happens when we do that is each level, when you compare it to the reference, will give a positive value. And then you can kind of just order them in magnitude size. So if we're still looking at this inpatient CO prevalence rate, we see that the level of 0 is the reference. So it's given a parameter estimate of 0. It's not written there, but it's 0. The next smallest is the one right above it, the 0.001 to 0.063. It's given the next smallest estimate, and then it goes on a stair step from there. And the higher this number is compared to the reference, the more risk attributed to that level. And we can view all of the variables in this table under that same lens. So go 1 column down is the CDI test type. The reference is the NAATEIA, with the other 2 test types giving a positive estimate. So they have more risk than the referent. The combined ED-CO rate is broken into 4 levels, with that bottom level being the referent, and then it stair steps up from there. The facility type, it's 3 categories. The specialty other is given the referent, and then the other 2 levels are given a positive estimate. Similar interpretation for the number of ICU beds. That smallest level is given the referent, and it stair steps from there. Medical school affiliation types broken into 2 different levels. The first one being a major, a graduate, or a non-teaching facility, and then the reference being a undergraduate facility. And then length of stay is dichotomized into two different groups at the value of 5.4 days. A lot of work goes into figuring out what these cut points are. I'm going to spare you those details, but it's dichotomized at 5.4, with the lower length of stay being the reference. Next slide, please. So now let's work through an example. So we have to go from the table we just saw with a bunch of levels and estimates in it into a calculation where we compute what the expected number of events are. So here is totally fictitious hospital. We are going to calculate what's in this red box here. So this is a random quarter for this made-up hospital, and all of the data that goes into the risk model are laid out here in this table. So you can see what the CO prevalence rate is, the ED OBS prevalence rate, what the test type was, what the facility type was, the medical type, the ICU beds, the length of stay, and the number of patient days. So we're going to take all the data that's in this row, use the table that we just looked at to figure out what this particular quarter's expected number of events are. All right, next slide. And here we're going to look at the highlighted rows. So based on the last slide, all we have to do is find out what level each variable falls in. So we've highlighted the intercept. Remember, that's going to be used for all of our calculations. Our fictitious example had a 0 rate for CO prevalence rate, so it's highlighted there and given the referent. Remember, the referent just means 0. The CDI test type was the NAAT, and it's given that estimate, and we can work our way down. Now, we need to, at this point, we have all of our attributes highlighted for the variable. Now we have to go into a calculation on how to get the predicted number of events. And the first step is quite easy. We are going to add up all of these numbers that are highlighted. If you see the word referent, it's a 0. Plug them into a calculator, get what that number is. Next slide. All right, once we plug all of those, highlighted numbers into a calculator, get the number, our next step is to exponentiate that number. So between the brackets in that big box is all of the addition that we did in the previous step. We added all these numbers together. Second step is we take e to that number. So if you're in Excel, it's the function exp. It's on every calculator, every computer. Very famous function. Figure out what e to that number is, and then as the last step, we are going to multiply it by the number of CDI LabID patient days, which in this case was 34,415. So if you do all of that work, you can trust me on the calculator part, you will end up with 4.826 predicted CDI LabID events. And once we're at this part, the SIR calculation is easy. We had a fun way to get to the expected number of events, but once we have this, it's a very easy calculation. So this quarter had 2 observed events, and we predicted them to have 4.826. So divide those two numbers out, and you will get their 2023 quarter 2 SIR is 0.414. Now, the great thing is we don't have to calculate these things by hand, right? That's what computers are way better doing this than humans are. So within the application, you can see all of this information. So at the very bottom of the slide, you can, in that red box, you can see that the number of predicted events, that first highlighted box there is 4.826, so that matches. The SIR is that simple calculation of 2 over the predicted, gives us 0.414. And then we give you a little extra information on top of that. It gives you a p-value of 0.1869, right? As you know, in the statistics world, we will call that a non-significant p-value, so that we cannot say that SIR is significantly different from 1. And the next slide, the next column over is the 95% confidence interval, and it ranges from 0.69 all the way to 1.369. And you will see that the value of 1 is right in the middle of those two. So it goes along with the non-significant p-value, and that we cannot say, you know, this fictitious example is significantly different from 1. Now, everything that I've said is probably written a lot better, and the guides goes into a lot more detail, but hopefully that gives a little, you know, a little bit of an explanation of what's going on in the background. And I'm going to turn this over to Karen.
Karen, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Oh, thank you. I was thanking Kevin. Thank you, Kevin, for setting us up and understanding the models. And I'm going to show you all how to view the SIR reports and to go into more details regarding the report features and how to access them. So the presentation will focus on the acute care hospitals SIR reports, and as more models are added, you will need to regenerate data sets before being able to view those new models. So the analysis tree view has been updated to include a new folder for the 2022 baseline SIR reports. And so the one I have on the slide here shows you the name and how the ACH report looks like, but you will find all of the CDI LabID SIRs will be added underneath that same folder, the subfolder. So similar to the current, what you are familiar with, the 2015 reports, users have the same options to modify the 2022 baseline SIR reports as they do the current reports. You're able to modify title, time period, filters, and the display options. Okay. Now I will go to providing more detail on the on the actual reports. So the CDI SIR for ACH or acute care hospitals is calculated at the facility-wide inpatient, or you may hear me refer to it as fac-wide in level, and it cannot be calculated for any individual location. However, CMS certified IRF units within a hospital will receive a separate SIR. The new SIR reports under the 2022 baseline folder will only run for data from 2022 and forward by default. In these new reports, you will also find that the footnotes have been updated with new details specific for the 2022 model. And as Kevin mentioned before, a great read. Hopefully, we'll be able to share a lot of great resources to the group. And in particular, the 2022 baseline SIR guide is now available, so you are able to view the risk factors in more detail. For the new reports, the report cadence for the CDI SIR reports are available at the quarterly level by default to generate monthly results. Monthly results will use the quarterly inpatient community onset and outpatient community onset prevalence rates, as well as the monthly number of patient days. And I will provide more details on how you will be able to generate monthly results later in this presentation. And the last fundamental to note is that for inpatient psychiatric facilities and the Veteran Affairs hospitals are excluded. These facilities can still run the 2015 baseline SR reports, the line listing reports, as well as the rate tables. Okay. So on the next few slides, I will be presenting a fictitious CDI SAR report for an acute care hospitals and use that report to walk you through the various pieces of the SIR report. Okay. You will find the 2022 baseline included in the title, as well as you're able to see the data sets have been updated to reflect, you're going to see the new dataset name, BS3, but the display of the first table in the SIR report has not changed. And also the SIR reports are still not calculated when the number of predicted infections is less than 1. Okay, so looking at some of the columns in the SIR report, you will find the months column will capture the number of months in that quarter of data that's included in the calculation. The SIR numerator is displayed. So that is the number of events that are included in the SIR, the number predicted, which is your SIR denominator. Also in this table, you will find the total CDI patient days for the quarter. And the last that I'll mention on this slide so far is the actual calculation of the SIR, the number of CDI events included in the SIR calculation divided by the number of predicted. I will note that the methods for calculating and displaying the SIR numerator, patient days, p-values, and 95% confidence intervals have not changed. Okay, and then just more on the calculation of the number predicted. This was calculated using the 2022 baseline CDI model. And on this link, it will take you to the SIR model Explorer for the CDI ACH model. And the model Explorer isn't available. You're going to view it as a website, but it's an inventory of the risk adjustment factors used to calculate the SIRs. Okay. So moving to the interpretation of the SIR. If the SIR is less than 1, then it is interpreted as that there were fewer CDI LabID events than predicted based on the 2022 national aggregate data. If the p-value is greater than 0.05, then we can conclude that the number of observed infections is not statistically significantly different than the number of predicted. And the last interpretation is looking at 5% confidence interval, and that if the confidence interval includes the value of 1, then the SIR is not significantly different. I will reference the really handy guide on how to interpret the SIR. It's one of our web documents called the Keys to Success with the NHSN data. Okay, and so for the last two columns I touched on briefly, which was the p-value and the 95% confidence interval. Based on the information included in the sample report, we will state that the SIR is not statistically significantly different than 1. Note that even if it's not statistically significant, the SIR, the p-value, and the confidence intervals will still be displayed in the table. Okay. So what to do if the number predicted is less than 1 and your facility is unable to view an SIR? As I mentioned before, the SIR will not calculate if the number predicted is less than 1. And so you will see that represented in the table where it may be hard to see, but it's a combination of being blank or you see like a small dot to represent missing data. If you're still interested in obtaining an SIR for your facility, you're able time period of the report to include a longer period. That way, potentially as the number of patient days increase, you may be able to obtain a number of predicted that reaches that threshold so that it will calculate the SIR. However, if that is not possible, as an alternative, you may be able to view infection rates to track the internal CDI incidence over time for your facility. And lastly, there will be an option to utilize the new TAP reports that will be updated for the 2022 baseline, which will be available, which will be coming soon, and will be send out notification regarding when those new reports will be available. Okay. So given So as mentioned before, the 2022 models, the CDI model uses a negative binomial regression model. Given that we looked through all of the columns that were included in that first table, our next question then we will be able to answer, well, then how is the number predicted calculated? We're able to use the second table that is displayed in the report, and that will include the 7 risk factors that Kevin reviewed for the model, as well as patient days that are all used to calculate the number predicted using the 2022 model. So we're going to go through another fictitious example to help break down the pieces of this additional table. And also another plug for the Model Explorer that will display the risk factors associated with the models. Okay, we'll start with just a column at a time. So with the first risk factor will be the inpatient community onset prevalence rate, which is calculated as the number predicted CDI events divided by the number of quarterly admissions times 100. This rate is based on the facility-wide reporting. The next column displays the outpatient community onset prevalence rate. And so it's the number of outpatient CDI events divided by the number of quarterly encounters times 100. And this is calculated based on reporting from the emergency departments and 24-hour observation locations. Another risk factor is CDI test type. And so CDI test type is classified from the CDI test method which is reported during the 3rd month of each quarter on the MDRO CDI monthly denominator forms that will correspond to March, June, September, and December. And on this slide, I included a screenshot of what that question looks like on the form. So on this slide, we'll see that the CDI test type is classified under the 2022 model for ACH as NAT EIA. Just in this example, the facility reported NAT EIA on their quarterly reporting form, and you'll see that the CDI test type classification for ACH across the next 3 bullets. I will note that the classification of CDI test type now differs for critical access hospitals and inpatient rehabilitation facilities. And then the last few columns we have are going to be related to the annual survey and data collected during enrollment. And so that includes the facility type, medical school affiliation, the number of ICU beds, and the average length of stay, which is in this table is displayed as LOS, but that represents the number of annual patient days and number divided by the number of annual admissions as collected on the annual survey. Just a note regarding the survey. The survey year that's used and the risk adjustment will align with the year of data being analyzed. So in this example, we use the 2023 survey because we are calculating the 2023 SIR. However, if the corresponding survey is not available, the SIR will use the most recent survey that is available. And the last column that's included in the risk factors table is the number of patient days. And this is calculated on the FACWIDE denominator form and summed for the quarter. So for CDI, the patient days patient days from CMS certified IRF units, IPF units, NICU, and well baby units are excluded from the CDI patient day count. Please note that, particularly if you're looking at the MRSA model, the number of patient days used in the CDI SIR can be different from the MRSA SIR, given that the MRSA patient days could include NICU and well baby units. And I will say that the number of CDI patient days will correspond to line 3 on the denominator form. So for the CDI SIR, there are exclusions from the number of predicted calculation, and that is because there is a missing risk factor. The number of predicted events cannot be calculated if any risk factor is missing. If the number of predicted events cannot be calculated, you will see a third table displayed at the bottom of the report. And this table, we're going to show a screenshot of it soon, but it will include the months excluded to help you identify the missing risk factor. However, common reasons for a missing risk factor is that it is a newly enrolled facility that had not completed the annual survey yet, that it's missing because the facility may have reported 0 admissions for the entire quarter. Therefore, the inpatient community onset prevalence rate could not be calculated. And the last reason for a missing risk factor is that the CDI test type is missing, and that would correspond to the facility not reporting CDI test method during the 3rd month of the quarter. So this is what that third table would look like. It will be titled CDI data, months excluded from SIR due to a missing risk factor. And I mentioned the common reasons, but this table here illustrates the first one that I mentioned, and that the facility did not complete a recent survey, therefore that the survey risk factors are missing and cannot be calculated. So specifically for the CDI ACH model, the data from the survey that the incomplete or missing survey, we're unable to calculate the number predicted because med type, medical school affiliation, the number of ICU beds are missing, and then we are unable to calculate length of stay. But for this table, we're displaying it as that the number of patient days from the survey and the number of admissions from the survey are all missing. Lastly, facilities are able to review their data entry to ensure accurate denominators are provided on those monthly denominator forms. Okay. So something that is slightly different from the 2015 models. So now there are an option to view monthly results for CDI. And so there are a few steps to do so. The first is to wait for that quarter to be complete. In this case, all 3 months of the calendar quarter must be entered into the application before attempting to produce a monthly SIR report. The second would be just always a reminder, don't forget to regenerate data sets just to ensure that all of the monthly data or all of the data has been captured. And the third step would be that would require a modification to the SIR report by changing the group by option to summary YM. Okay, so this is how that would look when you're attempting to modify the report. It's this, you would use the same SIR report that you would view the quarterly results, but under the display options, you were changing it to the summary YM. And when you run those results, this is how the table would display, where instead of the quarterly data, you will see the monthly data and the monthly number of predicted and associated patient days. And so now I will review several data quality checks to ensure the accuracy of the SIR report. Okay. So to confirm the accuracy of the CDI SIR numerator, we recommend that you run and review the line list for all the line list report for CDI. So it's the line listing for all CDI LabID events. This will show you how to navigate to that particular report. And then when running that report, excuse me, this is an output when you run the report. The line list report includes an indicator variable that can be used to verify which events are counted in the numerator of the SIR. And so for the CDI acute care example, if the indicator, can't highlight, it's the one in the box. If you see that, if it has a value of 1, then the event is counted in the numerator. I apologize. There's a typo on this slide. I will make sure to update it. I apologize. However, also in this line list, you will see that there's additional indicators, so you're also able to see which events are included in the community onset prevalence rate variable. Continuing with a few more data quality checks. But now it involves us looking at the SIR denominator. So let's examine the accuracy of the number predicted. To do so, you're able to review, you have a number of options to review the risk adjustment factors table, or even explore to see if there's any months that have been excluded from the report. So for still looking at the number predicted, but now we're going to look at the risk factors table. This is what I referred to as our table 2. The second table is generated in your CDI SIR report, and it will display all of the covariates used to calculate the number predicted. To confirm the prevalence rates, you're able to run and review the rate table, and then to confirm any of the survey risk factors, you're also able to run the line list for the survey. And I'm going to show how to navigate to each of these reports on the next slides. So the first one is looking at the rates table, and here we're able to look at the inpatient community onset prevalence rate, as well as the outpatient community onset prevalence rate. And both of those rates are available within the, the rates are available through the HAI data reports folder, and then the CDI subfolder, and then you're able to select the rates report. Within the rates reports, you're able to modify your report. So by default, the rates table will display by month, but if you want to verify the quarterly rate that is used in the SIR, to change the group by option to summary YQ, so you're able to view the quarterly rates. And the last set of risk factors that you're able to verify is from the annual survey. So with the annual survey, you're able to view it from your supplemental reports and the subfolder facility data. In this subfolder, you're going to find multiple survey line listing reports, and it's going to depend on the year that you're interested in. I didn't display all of those reports here, but each of the reports will tell you what years are included. So for this particular report, we're looking at the 2023 survey. And similar, as I mentioned before, you would want to look at the survey year that corresponds to the year of data you're analyzing. And the last data quality check for the number predicted is a review of the table 3, your third table, the months excluded table. This will generate for your facility if there are any missing factors, risk factors. If your facility, if there are no missing risk factors, you will not see the third table. This third table will populate if the CDI test method is missing. And for each of these missing areas, I'm going to show you how to navigate to those tables. So you have missing CDI test method. If the facility may have reported 0 for the quarterly number of admissions. And a third reason for missing this is the annual survey is missing. So for this particular example, I captured 2 examples. The first one is that the CDI test method was missing for that particular quarter. And then the second cause of missingness is your 2024 data, is that the risk factor, the inpatient community onset prevalence rate could not be calculated because number of admissions for the quarter will equal 0. And then the last topic is for data quality is just to examine patient days, because again, patient days is used to calculate the number of predicted events. You have 2 options to review patient days, and it depends on your preference. You can review the MDRO CDI summary data or a report. So it's another line list report that we have. So I'll start with the line list report. The line list report for the summary data are also listed under the supplemental reports. By default, when you run the report, you're going to have more variables included here, but this screenshot, I moved some of the variables over and only display the variables that will be of interest if you're reviewing the patient days. For CDI, I would recommend that you apply filters. These filters such that the event type equals CDI and location equals FACWhiteN. And again, this will just reduce the size of the table and allow you to see exactly what you're looking to see. But if you don't want to use the report, you're able to review the actual data entry area, and you will see that the data included in the report will be consistent with the data that you've entered. So for this particular example, I'm displaying the March 2023 report, and we're able to see that the patient days listed in the report will correspond, patient days entered will correspond to what you're able to view in the report. Okay, and that wraps up the CDI ACH model, but I want to review just a few new resources to help understand the rebaseline. So on this, we have additional resources for education and analysis. On this page, you're able to explore 3 tabs of data: the understanding the new models, using the new models, and then a link devoted to education and training. If you are interested in more information on the new CDI models, we have also published an implementation guide and change log. This guide covers all of the inclusion and exclusion rules associated with the models. It will list the differences in the functionality between the 2022 SAR reports compared to the 2015. And lastly, it will highlight any minor change made to the CDI reports due to the rebaseline implementation, such as even the dataset name that I mentioned, that you will see that they will start with BS3 for your CDI SAR reports. Okay, and if you're interested in resources to help with talking points to present the rebaseline data to your colleagues, leadership, or other organizations, we also have on this slide a few links that will take you to guides, really succinct information of the focusing on the bottom line, what are the differences, and how to convey it to an audience. And then we mentioned this before, been plugging it for a while, the Model Explorer. Again, this is a location where you're able to review the risk adjustment factors used in the calculation of the number of predicted events. And you're also able to view these tables directly within a web browser by HAI by facility type. And lastly, just a few slides just highlighting more links and resources. We have it across a few slides. So I'm just going to click through these. We've linked to them throughout the presentation, but if you're interested in being able to copy and bookmark all of the links, you're able just to visit the last few slides of the presentation to copy those. Okay, and lastly, if there are any rebaseline questions, users with SAMS access can submit them through the ServiceNow portal. Those without SAMS or ServiceNow access are able to email the help desk at nhsn@cdc.gov. And also, if there are any questions about the CMS programs, a link to the tool and the addresses before, but they're also here again. So please use these links and email contacts if there are any questions about the CMS programs. And then lastly, for any questions or concerns, please contact the NHSN Help Desk with the subject line 2022 HAI Rebaseline. And again, the links to ServiceNow are also here, and the link to the email address for the help desk are also listed on this slide. And lastly, if there are any media inquiries related to the rebaseline, please contact the CDC Media Office at media@cdc.gov.